These were not decorative objects. They were data, cast in metal so it would outlast human memory. When you walk through the halls of modern museums, you will see them displayed under glass, categorized simply as sculpture or craft. But the empire that produced them did not cast them for aesthetic pleasure. They designed them to serve a far more functional purpose, a permanent state archive. Today, we are dismantling the myth of the unwritten African past and examining how the precolonial kingdom of Benin utilized metallurgy as a highly structured scientific method for record-keeping, calendrical tracking, and state administration. Welcome back to BTS Africa Media. I am your host, the Social Architect. As a medical sociologist, my work focuses on how societies build institutional frameworks to manage human life, health, and data. We often assume that the scientific method, observation, documentation, and systematic application is an exclusively Western or modern phenomenon. We assume that if a civilization did not write on paper or parchment, they were simply guessing their way through history. But institutions require records. You cannot run an empire that spans centuries, manages complex trade routes, and sustains massive urban populations without rigorous data collection. The historic Kingdom of Benin, located in present-day southern Nigeria and built by the Edo people, solved the problem of data preservation through advanced metallurgy. The renowned Benin Bronzes, specifically the thousands of brass relief plaques that once adorned the pillars of the Oba's palace, were the ultimate manifestation of this. In this episode, we are going to read these plaques not as art critics, but as analysts, to uncover the internal record-keeping science of the Benin Empire. To understand the scientific function of the bronzes, we first have to address how they have been misrepresented. When the British forces looted the royal palace in the punitive expedition of 1897, they stripped thousands of plaques from the walls and shipped them to Europe. Upon arrival, Western scholars were astounded by the metallurgical sophistication. The casting method, known as lost wax casting, cire perdue, was so advanced that early European curators falsely hypothesized the Edo people must have learned it from outsiders. But a more insidious intellectual theft occurred when these plaques were placed in Western museums. By categorizing these items strictly as art of Africa, the curators stripped the artifacts of their epistemological value. When a European king writes a treaty on a piece of paper, it is classified as a historical document. When the Oba of Benin recorded a treaty, a military victory, or a court hierarchy in a cast brass plaque, it was classified as a craft. This framing obscures a profound structural reality. The plaques were a systematic documentation method. The Oba maintained a royal monopoly on brass casting. The specialized guild of casters, the Igun Erinwan, were not rogue artists expressing themselves. They were state archivists. They utilized a standardized visual lexicon, specific proportions, symbolic positioning, and hierarchical scaling to ensure that anyone trained in the system could read the data centuries later. The brilliance of this system goes beyond recording past events. It extends into predictive science and administrative planning. In any agricultural and trade-based empire, tracking time, seasonal shifts, and ecological cycles is a matter of state security. The Benin plaques served as a sophisticated calendrical system. If you analyze the motifs cast into the backgrounds of these reliefs, the specific types of flora, the presence of certain animals like the mudfish, the leopard, or the ibis, they are not random decorative choices. The mudfish, for example, is a creature capable of surviving in both water and on dry land, burying itself in the mud during the dry season and re-emerging with the rains. In the Edo framework, this was a precise marker of the shifting seasons. When combined with specific ceremonial tools depicted on the plaques, these visuals encoded the timing of state rituals, such as the Igwe festival, which was critical for renewing the Oba's spiritual and administrative authority at the end of the year. This was a calendar built into the architecture. By walking through the palace courtyards, court officials could reference these physical records to plan agricultural harvests, time diplomatic missions, and manage the empire's economy. The plaques functioned as an environmental and administrative database, linking the biological cycles of the earth to the institutional actions of the state. What we are witnessing here is a pre-colonial scientific method that operated completely independently of external validation. Science is, at its core, the systematic organization of knowledge that can be tested, verified, and passed down. The Edo metallurgists observed the degradation of wood and cloth in a humid tropical environment. They hypothesized correctly that brass and bronze, materials resistant to rust and decay, were the most scientifically sound mediums for permanent data storage. This shatters the persistent myth of the illiterate African past. Literacy is simply the ability to encode and decode information. The Benin Kingdom developed a multi-layered, three-dimensional literacy. They recorded their data in metal because it was a deliberate, empirical choice for longevity. When we fail to recognize this, we fail to understand the true intellectual capacity of historical African states. They did not need to borrow the scientific method. They had already cast it into the very walls of their capital. The Kingdom of Benin understood that cycles, whether they are the cycles of the seasons, the cycles of the state, or the cycles of the human body, require structural frameworks to manage them properly. They built systems to honor and track these rhythms. As a medical sociologist, I study how we have lost these institutional frameworks today, particularly when it comes to human biology. If you are fascinated by how ancient societies built systems around natural cycles, you must read my book series, Lunar Mysticism, Ancient Wisdom on the Menstrual Cycle, and the Art of Coming Back to Yourself. Just as the Oba's archivists track the seasons, Lunar Mysticism explores how historical civilizations built formal medical systems, sacred rites, and institutional authority around bodily health and biological cycles. It is a rigorous, evidence-based return to your own internal data. You can find the link to the book, as well as the companion tracker, the Lunar Journal, in the description box below. The past is not a primitive place. It is a meticulously documented archive waiting for us to read it correctly. Thank you for joining me in the study today. If you value this kind of analytical, source-checked investigation into historical sociology and African heritage, hit the subscribe button. Like this video and leave a comment below. What other historical African technologies or institutions should we analyze next? I am the Social Architect, and this is BTS Africa Media. I will see you in the next video.